I wanted to make a new version of this book where I go in and I rewrite all the things that need to be readdressed. A lot of people have asked me, what would I leave out? What would I add? And there's a lot. There's a lot of things that I would suggest doing differently, but there's an awful lot that's very, very true still to this day. So what I decided to do is, instead of going in and trying to rewrite this, I decided I'm going to try something new. I'm going to play the audiobook section by section to you on my YouTube channel. And then whenever I get to a place where I'm like, wait, this is different now, I have some new advice, I'd suggest not doing that, or this is good, but it's missing this, I will just cut in like I'm doing right now, and I'll just update the content. So that way you can get the whole audiobook eventually on my YouTube channel with new updates. It will be the new edition. This will be the new edition. And then maybe I can get all these YouTube videos edited into a new edition of the book. So without any more jabbering, here is Unnatural Talent, my full-on 260-page book with new thoughts and new ideas. If you guys like this series, please give it a thumbs up. Please leave a comment. Please let me know that you like it. Please share it so that it inspires me to keep doing this with the whole book. Because trust me, there's a lot of stuff we can cover in this book. Ideally, I would love to have this whole thing for free on YouTube. Here you go, Unnatural Talent. Unnatural Talent. Creating, printing, and selling your comic in the digital age by Jason Brubaker. The big dream. Do you dream about quitting your day job so you can work on your own stories full time? Do you think you have something special that, if given the opportunity, it could be a hit? Can you really get a graphic novel finished in your free time? And if you do get it finished, how are you supposed to get it in front of big publishers, agents, or movie studios, or even just an audience? Should you send your comic script to agents or put it online? Will putting it online ruin your chances of a serious publishing deal? What about YouTube or Patreon or Webtoons? What about any of the other things that are going on right now online that are generating huge followings? Indiegogo! Is there really any way to make a living at this, even though right now you might feel like a no-name artist? These are all questions I struggled with when I first started my journey to make creator-owned comics. Like many of you, I thought that I needed that big break to really make a go of it. Even though a big break would be nice, let's face it, they're pretty rare. So I don't worry about that anymore. Now, I'm convinced that if someone has a good story and the art to back it up, they can simply take a lot of little steps that add up to that big break. The best part is, you don't have to wait for someone else to give you their stamp of approval. Your first little step towards that big break is creating something awesome. The next step, put it out there for people to judge for themselves. With it out on the internet for all to see, there are no more excuses. Instead of telling everyone you have a great idea that could make millions, you have the ability to see if it's a great idea. With the internet and some of the lessons I've learned, which are all in this book, it's all in your hands. If your idea is truly bad, the internet won't shy to tell you. But if it's truly a work of genius that you think it is, there's no doubt in my mind it will get all the success it deserves. This book is for anyone who has ever had an idea they were sure would be a hit, but weren't quite sure how to proceed. I'll give you insight and pitfalls I experienced while making my original graphic novel, Remind. Part 1. So, you want to make a graphic novel? Let me tell you a story. I cracked open a fresh box of newly printed comics and carefully spread a handful across my table at the Alternative Press Expo, APE, that is, in San Francisco. I was ready for my first convention to start, and the doors were about to open. Boy, was I nervous, but the excitement helped me forget about how much money I had spent printing my labor of love. 2 months earlier, I paid $2,200 to print 1,000 copies of my black and white comic, Phobos. After selling 50 copies to friends and family, I was still sitting on over 900 copies. But that was okay, I thought, because I'm finally at a comic convention. If there's a place to sell an indie comic, it would be here, right? Well, In about 5 minutes, I'd find out what the general public thought, giving me a pretty good idea of whether all my hard work and money would pay off. It's gotta sell, I thought, because I've always been told I have lots of talent. A loud voice rang out over the speaker systems.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the ApeCon! The show floor is now open to the public. Have a great show.
Cheers echoed throughout the hallways. This was the moment I've been dreaming about all my life, exhibiting at a comic convention, selling my very own comic just like my childhood heroes. In a sense, I felt like I'd arrived. But would the public actually like it? Would the cover art attract anyone's attention? Would they like my art, my storytelling? Would it be easy or hard to sell? Is this your comic? Asked an attendee. Yeah, I wrote it and drew it. What's it about? Well, it's a spoof on all the classic horror characters. It looks cool. Yeah, I'll take one. I'm in! Cue the uplifting instrumental music. My first sale to someone I didn't know. Ha-ha! The next 2 days were a whirlwind of fans, flashing lights, and television interviews. I sold the motion picture rights to Warner Brothers that weekend, and I've been traveling around the world in my yacht ever since. At least that's what we all want to hear, right? Here's how it really went down. 2 days later, the convention was finally over, and my perspective on making and selling comics had forever changed. The cover didn't attract enough attention. In fact, it seems like people avoided making eye contact with my book. I practically had to jump out into the crowd and force my flimsy little comic into people's hands and then run away before they could give it back. By the end of the show, I had sold only a handful of comics, many at half price, which put me in the hole after shelling out hundreds of dollars on the convention. I had no hope of ever doing this for a living, if I continued in this direction anyway. It was obvious I was doing something wrong, but what? Up until that point, my talent had taken me a long way. It paid the bills, it helped me get hundreds of jobs with almost every major Hollywood studio for the last 2 decades. I was a professional artist, so why wasn't it working here? I tried to imitate other comic creators who had successfully made it into the field, but it seemed like there was some hidden factor that I was unaware of. What was it? Obviously, I had a lot of time to think about these things as I manned my lonely booth for 2 days. I thought about my life up to that point and wondered why I, now in my 30s, was still chasing this crazy dream of making comics. The truth is, I ignored comics for about 10 years as I focused on my career as an artist. So why was I back here trying to start up this dream again? Simple, really. I felt like it was my God-given purpose to tell stories. At a very early age, I loved art and to tell stories. My mom filled a shoebox with dozens of books written, transcribed by my mom, and drawn in crayon by me. And this was before I even started grade school. During my grade school years, I drew stick figure books with simple stories that were stapled together into little comics. I made crude and out-of-focus 8mm animations. I wrote short stories with elaborate illustrations. When I look back through all this, I'm surprised at the sheer amount of work I invested into telling stories. But here's the thing. It never felt like I was doing work. It always felt like fun to me. While other kids were good at sports, I got good at drawing stories. When I was 11, my teacher noticed I was working on a comic strip and introduced me to an editor at the local paper. From then on, I had a weekly comic strip called Scruffy, published in the local paper, that the whole town seemed to read. I became known as Scruffy in school. Once again, the other kids were playing sports. I was drawing my comic strips. While I was in high school, this was in the early 90s, and keep your old man jokes to yourself. My friends and I would stay up all hours of the night drawing comics at the local Denny's, thanks to an endless supply of free drinks courtesy of our friends who worked there. Eventually, I finished and printed my first creator-owned comic called Phobos. I printed 50 copies at Kinko's and sent a copy to every indie comic publisher in the country, which landed me a nationwide publishing deal. Keep in mind, this was all before the ease of the internet, print on demand, and Photoshop. Looking back, I can see that I easily must have logged 8,000 hours of drawing practice before even graduating from high school. The jocks had big muscles and cheerleader girlfriends, while I was still working on perfecting my art. After graduating from high school, the pressures of finding a career kicked in. So I shelved my dreams of making my own comics and began to dedicate all my time to practicing my skills so I could get a real career in art. I eventually signed on with a storyboarding agency called Famous Frames in Los Angeles, and my career was launched. I had finally made it, I thought. After all, I was getting paid good money to draw. Since starting my professional career at the age of 20, I have worked in illustration, storyboards, animation, concept designs, and visual development. I've done books, commercials, feature animation with almost every motion picture studio. People always tell me that I'm lucky to be doing what I love to do. But I'll let you in on a little secret. I've never really felt like this is what I love to do. I didn't want to be an artist just to be an artist. The art jobs were just a means to pay the bills and to gain experience. Deep down, I knew I had a purpose that was not being tapped yet, and this was all just preparing me for something greater. Believe it or not, there were many times I wanted to quit doing art for a living because I felt that I was wasting my talent on studios and products that I didn't believe in. I didn't know what else to do, so I just kept working to pay the bills. While reflecting on my childhood after a decade of frustrating art jobs, I realized I needed to focus again on what I felt was my purpose. The art was a vital element, but it needed a narrative that I believed in to go with it. When I was a preschooler, I didn't go around asking people what they wanted me to draw. I drew stories that were important to me. Once this realization clicked, I knew I needed to shift my focus from just doing art for people with money to creating narrative art that had a purpose. I soon found myself staying up late at night and on weekends scanning and adding gray tones to my old high school comic as a fun test. I began writing new dialogue and drawing new frames to help the story. My enjoyment level was the same as it was years ago when I drew the original pages. And just like when I was in high school, I was loving every moment of it. Fast forward to ApeCon in 2007, as I sat there trying to sell my 22-page remastered comic. I had spent years studying my craft and developing my skills as a professional artist. Better yet, I knew this was my calling, but even so, it wasn't working. Why? On top of that, there were hundreds of other questions that started surfacing. How much should it really cost to print a comic? Where should I print? Should I just make hardbound graphic novels instead? Manga? What size? What format? Should I put it online? If I put it online, will I lose sales? How do I get distribution? How do I get into Amazon? Bookstores? Comics? Should I outsource parts of it? How do I outsource and where? Should I self-publish or be published? Should I find a comic publisher or a book publisher? Agents? Publicists? How do I get funding? Grants? Crowdsourcing? What did I get myself into? The questions kept coming, and I drew a blank on every single one. At this point, I had made up my mind, and I didn't care if I was ignorant of the world of comics. I was determined to make this work, and so began the biggest, hardest journey of my life. And what I'm about to share with you are what I consider the most important lessons I've learned along the way. But first, the biggest lesson learned from all of this is that of faith. Now, if you don't like to talk about things like faith in God, then just skip this section, skip this paragraph, or risk squirming in your seat a little. But honestly, I feel like I would be lying if I left this out, so here goes. I believe faith is being sure of what you hope for and positive of what you cannot see. Why do I bring up faith in a book about making and selling comics, you ask? It's simple, really. If you're taking on this kind of mission, you've got to believe in your vision 100%. You've got to believe it's your calling and your purpose, because the journey ahead will be hard, and you will find yourself wanting to quit many times. You'll question everything you do. If you don't have the conviction that you're doing something that needs to be done, and you're the only one who can do it, then it will be too hard to push through the challenges you'll face along the way. Pray that God puts a story on your heart that you must tell. You think I'm joking? Well, I'm not. You've got to have faith, my friends. Otherwise, you're just chasing the wind. The chapters that follow are essays and opinions that I wrote while working on 2 graphic novels, building a fan base from scratch and selling over $100,000 in books. The articles were originally collected at remindblog.com and have become a great resource to many comic creators over the years. Many have asked me to update and assemble my articles and latest thoughts into a book. So here it is. Part 1 of this book deals with the mental preparation and planning involved in creating a comic. I think these are some of the most important chapters, so don't just skip ahead to the section on making money. In Part 2, I discuss practical things you can do for your comic's success and growth. Part 3 focuses on some money-making tips. Again, don't skip ahead, because there's a process that needs to be followed in order for your comic to be successful and to make you some money in the process. Okay, enough lecturing, let's get started. This has been the first chapter of Unnatural Talent. please join my mailing list. I will send you out an email every time I have a new book out or every time I have a new Kickstarter or whatever it is. If you also want to hear more of Unnatural Talent, if it's taken too long for me to update these videos on YouTube, you can always get it on Kindle, on Amazon. You can order it as a softcover, or you can listen to the audiobook version in its entirety on Audible. I'm going to be going through this whole thing on YouTube with new notes and new ideas and new thoughts. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.